Welcome to the True North Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome in to not the True North Fantasy Football Podcast, but this is the point after. But thanks for joining us. This week we got Ty on from our True North crew. I'm sorry, buddy. I got my wits all up in a bunch right now. So, Ty, tell me about yourself. Tell some people what they can get out of you and where they can find you.
Yeah, well, my name's Tyrell, so don't worry about it, my man, Jules. Nobody remembers my name. I get called Tyler or Terrell, which drives me nuts. I had a TA teacher who you go every week, once a week, from grade 8 to grade 12, and still to this day, he calls me Terrell. And it's like, dude, everyone calls me Ty. It's TY. Let's go. Like, what is happening?
You're like, that's not my name, man.
Unreal. So, yeah, that's pretty much my life story. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I've been keeping busy. My work shut down today after the end of the day, so I've got a lot of time off. I'm going to be pumping out some content. I'm actually pretty excited for it, so should be a blast, man. So let's kind of dive into what we're going to talk about today, because this isn't a typical podcast. We're normally going over players and who you can stream this week and that kind of stuff, but this week we're going to talk out basically about scouting and research, and what are the best sites to use, what are the most important metrics that lead directly to fantasy points, and then what are the pros and cons of film grinding versus stat grinding, that kind of stuff. So it should be a good show, man.
Yeah, I'm excited, and we're gonna talk. I'm sure we'll talk some football for Thursday Night Football and all that. And we'll make sure we're rolling in player examples and all that. But I think it's really important to kind of like adopt this winner mentality, know how to attack stuff once you're getting into the fantasy football playoffs, and for people in Dynasty, like once you're either contending and you want that mentality at all times, that shark mentality anyways, or you're rebuilding and you're looking for avenues to explore when it comes to becoming like a better fantasy owner. So definitely stuff we love doing every year, and I'm excited to talk about it for sure.
100%, man. And I wanted to bring you on specifically to talk about this because I just have so much respect for what you do and the way that you're able to analyze. Like, man, I'm sorry, my camera is just it's blurred in and out here. I don't know what's going on, but just ignore that, guys. But no, I just really appreciate what you do and what you bring to the fantasy community. So I'm super pumped to have you on and kind of dig into this stuff so we can give some valuable knowledge to people for their fantasy teams.
Yeah, it's been a riot working with you over the last 6 months or whatever it's been. Feels like it's flown by. That's for sure.
It really has.
It has flown by.
Yeah, whatever. You're good.
Something like that.
You're good. We're not in high school anymore. So before we get into all that, man, I just want to jump into Week 11 surprises from this past week. First one I want to talk about is this Colts backfield. They came out. They said Naeem Hines is going to be the primary ball carrier heading into this week. And then JT got all the work, and he put up a great fantasy showing. So what are you doing with this backfield moving forward? And how do you look at these guys?
I mean, this week didn't necessarily change my opinion too much. I think maybe it was a glimpse of things to come just because of the strength of schedule for the Colts. I mean, we talked about it on the spot last week, Jules, and it's your poor Packers, man. They just bleed fantasy points to the running back position. So we said that JT could have success running the ball in those early downs and that we could see some scoring in that game, even though Jonathan Taylor did not score in that game. Actually, he has just one touchdown in his last 5 games. So that's, or since week 5, sorry. So that's a little bit concerning. I think it's also in his last 5 games, but that's how I think we kind of have to approach this backfield going forward is matchup based, right? Like it's going to be an educated guess in this backfield, but I think we can get ahead of it by kind of analyzing the matchups like we did with Green Bay. And now I will say like Jonathan Taylor has the momentum, and no matter how impressive he's been in the passing game, I think he is capped as far as like being a top 12 running back, just because he's not going to get that pass catching work. Like his ceiling for fantasy is just going to be a little bit less of that of some of the running backs that are getting that kind of work in their offense, like Nyheim Hines is still going to be the passing down back, 2-minute drill guy. And if he runs runs hot in the first quarter, we've seen Jonathan Taylor can take a back seat for the whole game too. And that always just hurts our lineups, obviously. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. Like the Colts actually have a really conducive strength of schedule for the early down runner in this offense. Like this week they get Tennessee, next week they get Houston, the worst run defense in football, then Las Vegas, and in week 15 fantasy semifinals, Jonathan Taylor gets the worst run defense again in Houston. But I did want to mention also that the Colts get the Steelers in fantasy championship week, by the way, so that's just a brutal matchup. So while I do lean that like Jonathan Taylor, if I'm starting one or the other, it's going to be Jonathan Taylor in these friendly matchups, and he could help some teams even reach the finals, but he won't like win any fantasy owners a title because of that really tough matchup in week 16. But I think the pass catching just caps him, and he's not even scoring that much right now. So I like Jonathan Taylor, but RB2.
Do you think that there's room for positive regression to come in the touchdown department? You talked about he's had 5 games, only 1 touchdown, right? I mean, something's got to give eventually, right? A lot of those touches are going to Jordan Wilkins, and even Nyheim Hines has had some red zone targets, mostly not really rushes, but
Yeah, but he's playing there. It kind of reminds me of like a Sony Michel, James White dynamic from last year, right? Like, yeah, we know he's going to be the goal line back, and he profiles as that guy who's going to punch it in from the goal line. But how often is Phillip Rivers going to get this team down there? How many plays is this defensive-oriented team going to run in a game? I think there's just a lot of questions for how often they're even going to be there, how sustainable their drives have been this year for the Colts, and I think when it comes down to it, they're still going to be splitting snaps, and that'll even occur inside the 10-yard line. And we saw last year, it hasn't been as pronounced this season, but with Jacoby Brissett last year, they had the highest pass-to-rush ratio, passing the ball the highest inside the 10-yard line. So Frank Wright has no problem throwing the ball into the end zone as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, man. For the record, I lean JT as well.
And everyone wants to, right? But I do think we will. I think we will see that.
I just think it's better now because people's expectations aren't so high. So, like if you're expecting an RB2, right? And if he comes out and gives you RB1 numbers, we're all thrilled, right? Whereas everybody's just expecting that before. There the camera goes again. We're back.
Little Vaseline wiper.
Yeah. We got windshield. That's what I'm going to start doing. So, man, huge news. Number 1 overall pick, Joe Burrow. Just completely destroyed knee, not even, ACL, MCL, and I believe he also damaged his patellar tendon. So just an awful injury. You feel terrible for the guy. And, but as fantasy owners, we got to look at the players that this affects outside of Burrow. And, what are you doing with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd moving forward?
Well, I think you're avoiding them for redraft. There's no doubt. I mean, we've seen what's happened to these offenses, and I don't have enough faith in, obviously the situation is pretty putrid. I know that we have very little faith in somebody like T. Higgins being able to sustain any of the work that he's seen. He's seen this very juicy work, whether it's end zone targets, whether it's air yards, whether it's deep balls, but that's just like all of that is going to evaporate. Who is it? Jeff Driscoll is the quarterback?
No, it's going to be Brandon Allen this week.
That's right. Yeah, Brandon Allen. Sorry. So, yeah, I mean, that is what it is. And I don't think we have to talk too much about it, but I think from a dynasty perspective, it's really interesting, right? Because I'm still buying the shit out of Tyler Boyd. I'm still buying the shit out of T. Higgins. And as far as Joe Burrow, I think that's going to be the really interesting question because his recovery is obviously something to monitor over the offseason. You just hope he can get back to being the same player. You just feel for him personally, like what a roller coaster life over the last few years. Like Joe Burrow was doing some really special things in his rookie season. And like 3 years ago, he was just not even on the map before, the meteoric ascent to number 1 overall pick. And he was putting up some good stuff. Like 40% of the time, he was the top 12 quarterback this year. He is the only quarterback who averages 40 pass attempts per game this season. He's second in intended air yards, 5 of 10 games in his rookie year. Joe Burrow was over 300 yards passing, but some of that production is obviously thanks to the volume. Some could even kind of call Joe Burrow a compiler this year because there was just tons of fantasy points even left on the table in this passing game. You can blame AJ Green all you want, but I think to get back to your point, like we want T. Higgins, we want Tyler Boyd. We wanted to be attached to this passing game because of Joe Burrow, the direction of this team, and the way it was funneling through the wide receiver position. But I just think going forward, the offensive line just needs to be attended to. A lot of this, unfortunately, that was it wasn't the smartest idea to let your rookie quarterback throw the ball 40 times a game, or the most in the NFL for that matter. You hate to even go down that path because these are people's livelihoods and everything. But seeing the Browns head coach Zach Taylor continue to run out the same schemes, knowing his quarterback had already taken over 30 sacks on the season, just, still 3 wide receivers every time, no extra linemen, no chips, no nothing. So yeah, I don't know. We know that you can't put too much blame on Joe Burrow. I blame the system. I want to know what's going to happen with this coaching staff going forward, because, you're always going to have to observe that tendency of a rookie quarterback who holds onto the ball too long, especially a guy like Burrow who wants to make that play downfield and, has the ability to do it, has the arm strength to do it. And he can also scramble with the pants on fire mentality that you like to see. But my whole point is that the power of hindsight is cruel, but there's lessons you hope that, they learn for this coaching staff. So it goes without saying that his health and that the recovery from the serious injury will dictate this team's fantasy outlook going forward next year. I think we're avoiding for redraft, but the coaching staff could actually, what I'm saying is they could factor in heavily for me for how we should attack the Bengals in 2021 for fantasy.
Yeah, man, I think that's a great point. There's a lot to consider there. I love Higgins as far as a profile player goes, and just a fantastic wide receiver, great hands. He's just a big body. He's able to make guys miss in open field. But you worry about these guys. We're coming in with guys like Brandon Allen. It's just no offensive line already, and I'm a firm believer that you got to build an offensive line and then it's the quarterback. And you touched on it, right? When you said he's throwing for 40 passes a game, it's so difficult to put that on a rookie and then expect him to be able to take that week in, week out throughout a full season. So it's really unfortunate, and they got to look at this seriously and get some offensive linemen in there. I want to move on here. Just what's going on with the Broncos? They came out and they beat a stout Miami Dolphins team. Is this? I don't think we got any kind of a playoff contender on our hands, but is this a team that you can expect in 2021, 2022 to be able to compete with the Chiefs and the Chargers?
Not really, to be honest. Yeah, I think the Broncos are, definitely fighting an uphill battle so far as, having some of the most important pieces on that team that I just don't have faith in. I love these weapons, and you got to think Courtland Sutton's coming back next year as well. So you have all these pieces. It's really hard to fathom that we have to rely for all these pieces on a quarterback like Drew Lock. So it's really unfortunate, because I know we can give a little bit of credit to Drew Lock for what he's done recently. And I know he's had some adversity to battle himself this year. I know that offensive line isn't very good in Denver, but the offensive line and, the quarterback position are two of the most important positions, and everything trickles down from those two players or those two player groups. So I think when it comes to Jerry Jeudy, when it comes to KJ Hamler, when it comes to Noah Fant, when it comes to Courtland Sutton next year, I think they're all going to be a little bit overvalued, just in the sense that there's going to be volatility that comes along with that situation, because Denver is not going to be in a position to add one of these top quarterbacks. And I'm not sure that they're not tied to Drew Lock for at least another year or two anyways. So I think this team will almost, with head coach Nick Fangio there, I think we'll almost try and force their identity back to the defense next season after kind of going heavy offense in this NFL draft. So I think I'm going to definitely temper fantasy expectations, but I think on a will they compete with the Chiefs and stuff? No. Will they compete with Oakland and LA? I definitely think so on paper. I just think it'll be via defense, if anything.
Oh, Trap. Just sitting on my throne being served grapes. What a guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Lastly, I want to touch on yesterday's football games. We had some crazy fantasy production in this game. We had 3 players go over 30 points in most scoring formats. Watts 318 yards, 4 touchdowns. Will Fuller 171 yards, 2 touchdowns. Albeit one of them garbage time, and kind of a chintzy play, but fantasy points don't care. And Antonio Gibson, with a major breakout game, 115 yards, 3 touchdowns.
It's like Antonio.
Yeah, man, I love Antonio Gibson. I was not sold at the beginning of the year. I got to come clean about that. I missed big on that one, but I'm all on board now, buying them wherever I can, which is basically impossible now. So, that's great. But where are you sitting at with, after watching these games yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, you named a few guys that are really, lifting up some fantasy lineups. And I think it's important that you mention these guys because a lot of people have decisions to make. Once you're in a hole on Thursday night, you have to alter your mindset a little bit when you're setting your lineups in fantasy. So if you're going against a Deshaun Watson in Superflex, if you played a Will Fuller, if you already played an Antonio Gibson, maybe you take a safer path. When you're setting your lineup, you want a little bit more stability, but obviously you want to build in some of that high variance if you're in a hole after playing some of these guys. I think Deshaun Watson is just, so underrated for how well he's playing this year. It's incredible. Like he won't be able to win MVP or anything because he plays for the Texans, but he could easily be the offensive player of the year. I think I would love to see him win that award. And I think Will Fuller's just somebody who will always be all my best ball lineups will always be on my fantasy lineups too, because you draft this guy as like a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 on your roster, and he gives you wide receiver 1 weeks when healthy. And we know these supernatural seasons where somebody stays healthy forever always happens in a contract year. Hence, Will Fuller's blowing up this year. In fact, I don't think he had ever scored a touchdown past game 8 of the season in his entire career. I think he had 20 before that or 30 something before that in the months of September and October. Never scored in November or December. Now he has scored in 2 of 3 games in November. And first touchdown last week on Thursday ever after game 8 of the season. And then Antonio Gibson's just somebody I had a huge, heartthrob for all offseason. Mentioned how big of a weight-adjusted freak he is. I put out a bunch of quick hitters just doing during the draft process called the Sleeper Running Back Series, and I said Antonio Gibson was my favorite. I also said he could go as early as pick 53, and a lot of this has just really panned out because what he does, really translates to the NFL when it comes to breaking tackles, being elusive, accumulating those yards after contact, breaking off those big plays. And we're seeing it all. And we're also seeing what I didn't think we would see, which is a goal line role, which is short down usage. And I think it's interesting because going forward, whether JD McKissic is there or not, it plays a big role in his fantasy value going forward, because a lot of the use that's going to JD McKissic is exactly how we envisioned Antonio Gibson being used and being an absolute mismatch nightmare weapon. And I do see that going forward, but he just has to learn pass protection. And the good news there is he's built like a tree. He's like 240 pounds. I think he can learn pass pro.
Yeah, no kidding. And he's just super elusive once he gets into space. It's tough to stop that guy.
Yeah, well, I compared him to David Johnson because I thought the way he would get on the field, it would be, maybe he'd go in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round of the draft, and then special teams and flashes in the return game. Next thing he's on the field and he's catching passes and off to the races. But, his career arc has kind of played out a little bit differently, but it's equally gratifying.
And it's just beginning, So I'm just so excited for his future, like you root for guys like this. So. That's actually a perfect segue into what our main topic is tonight. You talked about how he had a lot of things translated really well to the NFL. Tell me a little bit about that. What's the most effective way to navigate the world of statistics?
Yeah.
What are your top 3 sites that you can go to find information on?
Yeah, I use lots of different sites. So I think there's a big question about whether you want to attack, whether you're going to. Yeah, I think you're breaking up there a bit, Jules. So Jules is running this. I understand that we are live, so I should probably just roll it. Some of the websites that we use are definitely subscription based, so you have to make that difficult decision whether you're going to, drop some dough on this hobby.
Yeah, sorry.
Obviously, I attack it basically from a game theory perspective, like I would poker or anything else that you're going to dive into and expect to make money doing so. Obviously, you have a lot of fun doing it while you're, but there's nothing more fun than crushing your buddies in fantasy, right? So I use PFF because you can find so much proprietary information on there, whether it's snaps out of the slot, whether it's coverage ratings and, how much specific cornerbacks are giving up in coverage and slot coverage, whatever. There's just so much stuff you can find there. Yards after contact per attempt can be found in the same spot as broken tackles, because a player like David Montgomery and Josh Jacobs can break the same amount of tackles, but Josh Jacobs can accumulate a tremendous amount more yards after contact, right? So it's an important distinguisher to make when you're looking at different statistics. You're not just grabbing one or the other, you're using them in concert with one another. Another great website that we use at True North Fantasy Football, just exhaustively, is RotoViz. RotoViz, I just swear by. I could literally spend episode after episode just going through what they do from their apps to their data, but I suggest you just go on there and kind of navigate it, because I really could go through all these websites. Pro Football Reference, Sharp Football Stats. These are just tremendous SIS data hub. These are invaluable resources at our fingertips, and a lot of them are free, guys, like Pro Football Reference, like Sharp Football, like SIS Data Hub, which actually provides data for almost all the sites that actually that charge you subscriptions, right? So my whole point would be that the best thing I would encourage people to do is just pick one or two of them and really familiarize yourself with them, because Pro Football Reference, you could spend weeks and weeks on there discovering new information. Same with Sharp Football, whether it's formation packages, whether it's how many red zone rushing attempts one team had, how many fantasy points are coming from just the wide receiver position. Once a guy leaves, you might want to know that in free agency. So there's really a million different sites, a million different resources. There are some that are much better than others, but I suggest that people just really gain a strong confidence in how to use at least one or two of these websites, and you'll be much further ahead of the game than a lot of other people.
Yeah, man, I think that's fantastic, right? I love RotoViz, big fan over there, and Pro Football Reference, and they're, like you said, they're all great, but just navigating them is definitely something that I had to learn how to do when I started podcasting.
Well, I think of something like Player Profiler, which is another great one that a lot of people spend a hefty penny for, but don't use it properly. Like there's, Leaderboard Builder there. It's one of the best resources in fantasy football. You can literally find stats of anything possible, pretty much. You could make a leaderboard of 10 different stats, whether it's red zone touches, red zone snap rates, all this stuff, and you can find all these unbelievable positive regression candidates in every different department. You can start stacking that on one another, and you find tremendous buys that way. But you do have to just get in there and familiarize yourself with it, or you might never know that the leaderboard builder exists on Player Profiler.
Yeah, man, I love that. Thank you. That's great.
Well, I feel like it's like a big open ocean sometimes, jumping into some of these sites. It really is.
Especially for like the average fan, it's just so difficult to, really find like what's valuable, right? Exactly. Like, am I just going to continue to look at, this person had 7 receptions and 50 yards. They did that 3 games in a row. Like, is that how you want to base your fantasy decisions? Or, you really want to, put in the work. So I think that's a great point. So
just follow, sorry to interject, but follow the people who do the work too, right? That's another part of resources 100%. And things at your fingertips, right? On Twitter is make a list. You have that ability on Twitter to just make a list. I have a fantasy football list with some of the best, most accurate analysts in the business. And those are the people that I rely on to at least break ties on my opinions and things like that, or make sure I know where the market is at or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable point. What stats do you find correlate most directly to fantasy points? I think we were kind of talking about this, but I think it's really important, right? You can just look at a normal stats scoreboard and take what you will with that, or you can dig into it. When you dig into it, what is it that's the most valuable?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we could talk all day and night about for sure. I think like the most important thing to remember is this is a game of math, not football, but fantasy football. And so stats are great, but I think like having a good grasp on the overall picture when it comes to like the numbers is more important, because like there is a gazillion topics inside of stats and all that, but because at the granular level, like weather versus climate versus the environment of a player, all that is different, right? And that's just kind of stealing a phrase from Dan Williamson of the GOAT District fame, by the way. But like there's regression, of course, like stuff as simple as looking at receiving yards to touchdown averages and finding the outliers on each side, right? Or somebody like Kyler Murray and the Cardinals who, just checked every box this offseason. Like I wrote an article for True North Fantasy Football in the offseason called A Buffet of Positive Regression. And I just laid out everything in store for the Cardinals. And obviously, it's even exceeded my wildest expectations, but you could point to touchdown rates, red zone efficiency. I even talked about Kyler having 0 goal line rushing touchdowns and how a massive correction was coming in that department, knowing that Kyler had, 4 rushing touchdowns. They just they came from outside the goal line range, outside of the 5-yard line. And knowing that he had a good share of his team's goal line carries and seeing the dozens of other goal line rushing touchdowns scored by quarterbacks year after year. So that, that goes down a rabbit hole where you want to find all these regression candidates. And what you do is I guess I describe it as hit rates on steroids. Like, hit rates is a very broad topic in itself, and it's a pretty fiery topic too. But you can become well-versed in hit rates, and that would encompass everything from how many, say, top 12 running backs came from the SEC in college football to how many top 24 wide receivers were rookies last year. You know what I mean? And knowing all this information can give you better advantages on what to do in the future. And you can attack prospect evaluation from that approach as a part of like a player's profile, right? Just knowing that he's from the SEC and, 40% of top 12 running backs in the last 5 years have come from the SEC. So if you're deciding between 2 players, why not just go with something that has success in the past? And I think, like, at the NFL level, it's really endless. The best way I think is just to like hammer all the tricks, whether it's knowing the percent of running backs in the top 12 who had 50 plus catches, or the weight of the average running back one in fantasy. These things are all good to know because you can snowball everything, right? Everything just comes together. And the key is just to stack all these pieces of game theory to put yourself ahead of the curve, right? And you can just make that one extra piece of information on a player count, because these are important pieces of information. And it's a lot of subjectivity inside of fantasy anyways, deciding between 2 players inside of a tier. It's one of the most difficult decisions you're going to have to make every season. And once you kind of dig into what players to target, you get kind of a good feel of like what's been successful in the past for people. Then you go on to hit rates versus average draft position. And that's where I really kind of get hot and bothered. So for like a rookie draft, you might want to know what the hit rates are for rookie running backs drafted in the 3rd round of the NFL draft. How often do they pan out for fantasy? Or how often do running backs taken in the 3rd round of a rookie draft end up panning out for fantasy, right? Because it makes you feel confident once you have multiple 2nd-round picks of a rookie draft, knowing that you'll hit on one of those 2 players if you take 2 wide receivers, for instance, or something. You can make fantasy a numbers game, essentially. It's just like, a wide receiver is making deep ball attempts like Tyreek Hill is just a numbers game in himself, right? And I just think you can make drafts a million times easier by adopting all this information, because you'll just know that rounds 3 to 6, for example, running back hit rates are just unbelievably awful. It's called the running back dead zone for a reason. And conversely, wide receiver hit rates are unbelievably friendly. It's just a borderline fantasy epiphany once you dive into that stuff, because you'll gain appreciation for elite fantasy players just seeing how rare a 300-point wide receiver is. Like, just knowing that in the last 5 years, 14 of 19 wide receivers to hit 300 fantasy points were drafted as top 12 wide receivers in a fantasy draft. And in fact, only 1 was drafted outside the top 24 wide receivers. And that was 5 years ago in Allen Robinson, 2015. So, wow. Jules, I know I'm losing a lot of people. Like, we probably have to dedicate a lot more time to this in the future, because it really is all encompassing, but it really is. It's just helpful to know that you need to be drafting wide receivers in the top 24 of ADP, right? You can't get to the point where the wide receiver 26 is going off the board and you have 1 on your team, because you're really, really fighting the math at that point. And the other side of that coin is obviously bust rates, which are really sobering. So we can definitely do like a deep dive anytime on some of these topics, really rabbit hole them, but I don't want to bore people to death. But let me finish with some of the numbers from this shit. Like, so from 2015 to 2019, the last half decade, about half of the wide receivers taken in the top 12 of fantasy drafts went on to score as top 12 wide receivers. And in 2019, it was a down season where only 25% of the top 12 wide receivers lived up to our expectations via draft position. Meanwhile, almost 70% of the wide receivers drafted as wide receiver 2s in ADP paid off. But over the last 5 years, that hit rate is actually under 60%. So the takeaway would be that either wide receiver is almost like a 50-50 proposition, or that there's less separation at the wide receiver position than we're used to, right? Like we don't feel the difference between the wide receiver 8 and the wide receiver 18 that we once did, right? So you can do that with all the positions, and you can do that for win rates as well. On RotoViz, they have an app that just shows you the percentage of league winners, like how many people who drafted player X won their league, how many owners who drafted a quarterback in round 5 or earlier went on to win their league. So yeah, I should cut this piss off, Jules.
No, it's great.
I don't even remember what the question was, anyways. Here.
No, you you got it. It was what metrics are most specific. So you're good, man.
So start from the foundation up, right? Like you want to learn all these kind of different building blocks, and you're building everything on top of one another, and you end up on this fantasy pyramid and looking down at the peasants in your league.
And you feel great up there.
Exactly. The sun's shining.
So I know this one's important to you. We've talked a lot about metrics, but film grinding versus stat grinding. Tell me where you stand on that, because I know this is important to you.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's it's not even that important to me. I just have strong convictions and strong opinions about it. But yeah, it's it's one of those things, right? Like I 100% respect the hell out of film grinders. I just don't. I don't incorporate it much more than say like 10% of a player's profile. You know what I mean? I just think I could put it down to like a granular level where I just appreciate, like I watch the film. I appreciate the nuance in every player's games, especially like a cornerback or a wide receiver. Like these are players you need to appreciate the nuance for. There's no doubt about it, because polish is a thing, and it's something I want in my players. I just think a lot of stuff that we see on film is teachable. That's number one. Number two, I think film is subjective. Like if I watch Derrick Henry and then watch Darrington Evans the next play, like it's your eyes are playing tricks on you. It's just psychology. I don't know what to tell you. So, I think it entirely depends on what order you watched running backs in, on how you might feel about them. I just think, you'll also hear bizarre things like Antonio Gibson runs upright. It's like the guy had 33 carries. He scored on like 15% of those carries, and he was untouched on a bunch of them. And I saw him drop his shoulder a few times. So I'm not sure where you saw that. Like, I just don't get film grinding all the time. And I really do respect it, because Saturday to Sunday would be somebody that I would recommend to the masses. Those are people who I respect like crazy. Paul Perducci or whatever, the lead scout guy there. He's just unreal. Like the epiphanies I've had listening to his podcast and some of reading some of his writing is exquisite. And like people at the Draft Network are really good. Like there is a lot of guys out there that are exquisite, but I just think relying on film guys is really hard, because they do get a lot wrong. And I think the stats bear out a lot better. Like I think somebody like Zach Moss would be a good example where, the film community just hated him, but the analytics community really liked him. And if the team likes him, you know what I mean? I just think that the stat community is a lot more, they're victims of take clock quite a bit too, I find. But the only thing I'll say is that stats can tell you things that the film can't. You can't watch a Buffalo Bills season this year and say, you know what, they are running 15%, 10 personnel this year. They have 4 wide receivers on the field, a ton. What is going on? Like you might notice that anecdotally, but it'll really jump off the page when you're looking at the stats, right? Or you can see that somebody like David Montgomery, yeah, he's breaking tackles at a league leading rate. It's exciting to watch, but he's accumulating no yards after contact, and his yards before contact aren't that much different than they were the year before, or they aren't that much different than a player like Mike Davis, who isn't, victim to the same problems that somebody like David Montgomery is having after his first contact. So that's another one that I could really talk about all day, because there is a lot of ways that I could point out in the stats that you do kind of gain an advantage, but there's no way that you're not incorporating film analysis into a prospect's evaluation or how a player is playing in season, especially when it comes to injuries. And that's where I really respect the film grinders, is people like David Chow and stuff like that, who can watch a video and be like, yeah, that's a high ankle sprain, he'll be out 4 weeks. Like that's when I really appreciate it, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's nuts, man. It's impressive. So another thing, man, I just finished a 14-team mid-season dynasty startup. It was a blast, but it got me thinking. Have you ever considered a 14-team or just any kind of mid-season best ball league?
I haven't really. I mean, I thought that was called DFS. Call me crazy, but I No, I've just never been asked to do one really. I've never kind of sought it out. I used to do like like survivor leagues and stuff like that, and you could like do those. You could start those mid-season and stuff to make them a little more interesting. So I've done that in the past and stuff, but no, usually I'm just kind of dedicating a lot more time to making sure I'm all over waivers and stuff like that because I am in 7 or 8 leagues, and I take my leagues pretty seriously. So I do upwards of like 300, 400 best balls each year in the off season, but I've kind of taken a break on making sure I don't have too much on my plate come this time of the year, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, you got a lot on your plate in the off season with all that film grinding. See what I did there? So
totally.
I want to just take a quick second to pull up a sponsor, Monkey Knife Fight. We love these guys, and just gonna give you guys a quick little video to
MKO.
1 second, guys. I'm new to this. I'm just finding it here. Okay, you ready?
Bleep bloop bloop.
Expand the Box Score is the essential database for stat heads like us. With NFL, NBA, MLB, college football, and even minor league baseball, they've got something for everyone. We use their NFL and college football bundle for lots of our deep dives, and you can find stats on there that you can't find anywhere else. The college football database specifically is invaluable in the offseason as you try to prepare for your rookie drafts, and you'll find something new every time you log on. If you want to start doing some data digging, head over to expandtheboxscore.com and use promo code TrueNorth10 at checkout to get 10% off. Again, that promo code is TrueNorth10 for 10% off. Expand the Box Score. Superior stats to dominate fantasy football.
Boom. And we're back. Thank you, Monkey Knife Fight, for everything they do, because I have a blast on there.
MKO.
All right. So lastly, man, I want to talk some trade philosophy. What are your what's your favorite thing to look at when you're in dynasty leagues, especially with a lot of trade deadlines, maybe have passed, but could be this upcoming week or all the way up to week 13. What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually trying to buy at this point of the year. So, I buy high a lot as well.
Naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. Always a buyer, always contender. But truthfully, like I don't ever tear down or anything. Maybe it's the Edmonton Oilers fan in me. I never, don't get too high in Dynasty. Don't get too Kevin Lowe in Dynasty because the full tear down, it doesn't work very often. I think we talk about philosophy, follow philosophies. That's the way I attack trades, is to basically follow general rules of thumbs, whether it's buying sophomore quarterbacks, whether it's buying sophomore wide receivers, whether it's, going out and buying high on a tight end that I see taking the next step, or going out and paying up what some people might call crazy for a Travis Kelce or something. I think those are the plays that I'm always looking to do. I'm always looking to trade my somewhat, ambiguous younger players, like, maybe it's too late to call Anthony Miller a young player, which it obviously is, but somebody like that is somebody I'm always trying to move off of. Somebody I'm falling out of love with is somebody I'll try and move off of. But I really do just try and stick to general rules of thumb where it comes to, I'm almost never buying a running back. I'll be selling running backs, if anything, but unless it's maybe like a young rookie running back, like a Christian McCaffrey off his rookie season or something. But yeah, I just think you're trying to follow the trends, and a lot of the stuff we talk about is just staying ahead of the market. So somebody like Chris Godwin last offseason would have been that player, and you make sure you go out and target specific players. And if you're a contender, you're obviously going out trying to pay whatever you can for an Aaron Jones, who has both the short term and the long term upside. So those are the kind of moves I want to make. I think I lost Jules. Because like trading is one of those, it's kind of a fine art. And I think a lot of people love to negotiate. They love to counter. I'm more of a fan of kind of just going for it all. Send my offer that I know is fair, that I know is very fair. And if they decline it, they decline it. If they counter, it's usually, something that I can counter back with that I'll feel comfortable with. And I feel like I know I get easily offended by bad trade offers, so I just don't like to subject my other fantasy owners to that. I like to be the guy that people have an easy time trading with. It's like super easy trading with me. Most people know that. So except some of my really close friends. But I think that's the way to go about it, because that way you're not offending anybody. That way, if somebody's going to sell somebody, they might come to you first, because that's obviously something that's hard to accomplish, is getting that notoriety in your league as the guy who will buy players or whatever, because that you hear, that's probably my biggest problem in the fantasy industry, is that I have a hard time being super social. Even though I'm outgoing, I don't have a fear of public speaking or anything. It's still hard for me to like interact the way I would in normal life on the internet. I don't know what it is. It's just a hangout, but
Some people are just better than others, man.
but I say that is some people's strength. There's no doubt, but that's not the best advice for everybody on how to be a good trader. But that is probably the best advice, is to be social, to be one of the guys who's active in the group chats and everything like that. It's a big benefit for trading. And because I was explaining, Jules, that I kind of just send an offer. And like I go through the thought process and everything, and say, this is what they need, this is what I need, this is the offer I'm going to send, and they'd be crazy not to take it. And then they'll usually counter something, and then we're in a very manageable negotiation. Yeah, where some people just like, I want this guy, they go and offer a trade to him without looking at their team or anything, and then you're in these DMs that are going back and forth, and you end up just way off of the point of where you were trying to get, and so that's my advice. But I definitely agree that if you're better at having those conversations in the DM, that maybe it's a lot better for other people.
Yeah, no, I definitely have to agree with that, man. I mean, most of my trades come with people who I have good relationships with. It's just natural, right? Like, you're gonna be able to talk to the people that you talk to, right? So, I love that. Sorry, by the way, guys, my internet has decided that it doesn't want to work well tonight. So we're just kind of rolling with the punches. But, last thing I just kind of want to get into before we hop off here is we've had some crazy league winners this year, like we got Rob Anderson, James Robinson, Justin Herbert, T. Higgins is another guy, like just TJ Hawkinson even. These are guys who are going pretty late in a lot of drafts, back in the 8th, 9th, 10th round, some of them, and, are really producing for fantasy. So, who's your favorite league winner? You got any on your teams who have just, really helped you make a championship run this year?
Well, I think Justin Herbert worked out really well in a couple of those sleeper leagues I have in my other dynasty league, actually, just because he's able to supplement. Like, those are super flex leagues. So I had players like Kyler Murray. I had Kyler Murray on one of these rosters that I'm doing really well in. And to be able to supplement him with a Justin Herbert, like, it's just been remarkable, because he obviously has the profile that, coming. Well, I guess we should start here. Like, I didn't get the margin between him and Tua. I understood the talent evaluation margin. I had Tua over Justin Herbert coming into this process. But once they both went back-to-back inside the top 10, quarterbacks who go in the top 10, they play year one, and they play well. And, Justin Herbert had all the tools that we covet for fantasy, whether it's his athleticism that rivals Josh Allen's at his size, or whether it's that arm that can throw the ball deep. So he has the deep passing, he has the athleticism. Those are two huge check marks that can give you that advantage that is so hard to find at a quarterback position, where all the players are scoring so close together after that top 5. So Justin Herbert's been somebody who has actually, been the definition of a league winner for me in that sense. And I think James Robinson is the other one, but I'll admit that I don't have as much exposure to James Robinson. And I was a fan of his coming out too, as like during the draft process sort of thing. But my issue was I wasn't entirely interested in the Jacksonville Jaguars running back, let alone somebody who I thought might cede passing work to Chris Thompson, who had a relationship with Gruden, the offensive coordinator, who's actually been pretty productive when healthy. So there was a lot of reasons. There was also Divine Ozigbo love. There was, whatever the fucking other guy's name was. I totally forget his name right now. But there was just a lot of running backs that I think we had to account for so far as competition. But once we heard that it was all going to be James Robinson, and pretty much all my drafts were done. So I really regret that, but it's also the biggest tip of the cap to James Robinson is that he has just entirely transcended that situation. In fact, he's been the engine that makes that offense go, and that's an understatement because you look to the future and that offense, that team, that organization is going to look entirely different in Jacksonville, whether it's the quarterback, whether it's a brand new high-end quarterback, but we also could see more wide receivers come in. We could see a tight end of consequence. We could see an offensive line that starts to be rebuilt. There's just a lot of issues with this Jacksonville team, none of which is the running back. And it's pretty incredible that he's been able to do what he's been able to do inside of this offense, inside of this situation that really he's been fighting since day one.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as a defense, where the ball's got to go, right? Like at this point with LaVisca out and, especially DJ Chark out this week, he's the best playmaker they have by far. And so that's really tough not tough for James Robinson, but it's tough on guys that didn't pick him up. Or you know what? I had a guy in one of my home dynasty leagues send a first for Ogzigbo.
Ooh, wow. And I will say, like we talked about hit rates and stuff earlier, like the more you dive into that, the more you realize that any pick that isn't a running back in, say, round 16 or 17 in like a best ball tournament is the wrong pick. So James Robinson is on a ton of my best ball rosters because of that, and especially early in the offseason because the path was there. And obviously you just want to build in that high variance. So should he hit, he might hit big. So he was a player that was on a lot of my best ball rosters, just not a lot of my seasonal leagues, unfortunately, or my dynasty rosters for that matter.
Yeah, I only got one Robinson share on a dynasty roster, and I traded for him actually. Shipped Drake off for him, so feeling pretty good.
Here's to you, Mr. Robinson.
All right, Ty. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. It's been a blast. I think there was a lot of valuable information in this pod, and I'm excited for people to hear it, man. It's going to be fun.
No, thanks for having me on. Sorry I couldn't cut a little bit of it shorter. Sorry I was rambly a bit there.
It's right where I wanted. You're good. I do just want to give a couple shout outs real quick. Our whole True North crew, you can find them all on Twitter. Just go to the True North and we got us all there. But, you can find our crew at True North FFB and then Viridian Global as well. I got this wicked hoodie from them, and I'm sure there's lots of merch flying around your room there too. So, that's at Viridian Global. Huge thanks to them and Monkey Knife Fight as well. For what they do, man. Yeah. There's lots of merch flying around your. Whoa.
Sorry.
All good. Right?
Don't mind me.